How do you know your parents love you?
By giving me lots of nice clothes and reading us the Bible before bed and doing prayers with us in a circle.
Do you have a favorite Bible story?
No.
Okay. Do you remember anything that you ever learned at church?
No.
How about you? Do you have a favorite story?
Genesis.
Oh yeah? That's a fun book.
I say the ark, when they build the ark.
Yeah.
Something about the animals getting in a boat.
Yes. What's
My
your
favorite story is the resurrection of Jesus.
Oh, wow. Trump card. Where did God come from?
Heaven, probably.
Duh. Colin, what do you think heaven is like?
It's really good. And like you don't get hurt.
No. Do you think there's ice cream?
I hope.
Yeah, it better be. Do you have a favorite Bible story? Which one?
The New Testament.
Oh, that's a great story.
The Old Testament.
Oh. The intellectual. Yep.
Has it ever occurred to you that basically every parent or guardian wants the same thing for their kids? A better future. Regardless of their religion, background, ethnicity, or nationality, every parent hopes their son or daughter will have the best possible future. If you ask parents to prioritize what matters most, it could range anywhere from good friends, to a college education, to a decent job, to a happy marriage, to a Christian faith, and maybe even an Apple computer. But if you organize everything that is on their list, and trust me, we've done this multiple times, you can always boil it down to three major categories: smarter decisions, stronger relationships, and deeper faith. And not necessarily in that order. Actually, we could make the argument that all three of those things could be summarized by one thing: one idea. One idea that matters more than any idea. One rule at every phase that affects everything in life. Nearly 2,000 years ago, some religious leaders asked Jesus what he thought mattered most in life. It's interesting how Jesus responded. What he said was classic. It's quoted so much, actually, that sometimes I think we lose the impact of it. But Jesus, in one sentence, summarized life. When he was asked what commandment is the greatest, here's what he said: "The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all of your mind, soul, and strength." Then Jesus said something that caught everyone off guard. He reached into the 600 plus laws of the ancient writings of Moses, and he pulled out an isolated verse and attached it to what they thought they knew. He elevated one rule above the rest. He basically said, oh, and one more thing. There's a second part to the greatest commandment that's just as important as the first part. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus took something Moses had said about how you relate to God and expanded it to include how you relate to others. He made it clear that faith and life is not about a list of rules, but about responding to a relationship. Jesus suggested that faith in God has less to do with believing a list of truths and more to do with knowing and loving God. Basically, everything comes back to how you love God and how you love others and how you love life. Let's paraphrase. Love matters. Let's amplify it for just a second. Loving God matters, loving people matters, and loving life matters. And it all happens to be true at the same time. The Great Commandment is a genius way of summarizing pretty much everything in life. I mean, of course it is. It came from the one who made everyone in his image. And before you get too opinionated about an overemphasis on love, you just have to remember who said this. Be careful you don't minimize what Jesus maximized. Think about what Jesus said this way. Imagine that you have three dials you can turn to help kids connect to God, and they're all related to loving God. Dial number one is wonder. It affects a kid's thinking and imagination about God's love. Dial number 2 is discovery. It affects a kid's emotional and moral response to God's love. Dial number 3 is passion, and it affects how a kid's relationships to others reflects God's love. As a parent, you are constantly turning all 3 of these dials in your kid's life at every phase. You're actually doing what a lot of experts in culture do. They have obviously learned how to do the same 3 things in every kid's life. They've studied what inspires and moves kids. They know kids are naturally curious about things that are mysterious, that kids want to understand who they are, that kids want to connect and belong, so they play to their audience, actually better than most parents. Just watch the latest animated Disney movie, play with the newest educational toy, listen to the most recent band, or pick up an iPhone. There's been a lot of research and money spent to understand what drives children. It's almost as if every kid is wearing a sign that says, "Amaze me, inspire me, move me." So think about what you do in the light of that. That's why your role as a parent is so important. You're supposed to amaze a kid's mind to imagine God, to inspire a kid's will to follow God, to move a kid's life to serve God. And remember, whenever you teach or play or model or discuss or sing or storytell or pray or worship or read, you're usually turning one of these 3 dials. So you can help kids relate to God in such a way that it affects how they relate to others and how they see themselves. And when you lead kids to follow Jesus, you tend to define faith in terms of a relationship. That's why we define authentic faith on our phase life maps in the light of the Great Commandment. It kind of gives us an end-in-mind goal. Here's what we say faith is: trusting Jesus in a way that transforms how you love God, yourself, and others. If we encourage this kind of faith in a child and we motivate them to pursue loving God and loving life and loving others, they win. That's why you should take your cue from Jesus and introduce every kid to God's story of love and forgiveness, because it's a story of redemption. I don't know if you've thought about it this way, but it's actually a story about restoring God's image so a child can become more of what God designed them to be. Think about the story of the Bible. Here's the Cliff Notes version. God created Adam, the original man, in his image. Then Adam sinned and made a mess of God's image, so God decided to become a human and show everyone how much he loved the people who were made in his image. That's actually why Paul refers to Jesus as the second Adam. Jesus came to fix what the first Adam messed up, and that's exactly what Jesus did. Everything that Jesus did in the entire gospel story reinforces that we should treat others like they are made in the image of God. It all comes back to the Great Commandment. This is where you come in as parents. You show up every week in every phase of every kid's life because you want them to walk away one day, right? With a faith that's not defined by what they do, but instead it's determined by who they love. The one rule Jesus made was to make relationships the rule. Here's why. If you want kids or teenagers to walk away from your home or church one day and remember what's most important, you need to lead them strategically to that end. You need to stay focused on what Jesus said matters. You know why you should stay focused? Because just like the disciples or Pharisees, it's easy for us to get distracted. And the sobering reality is we have a limited window of time to influence every kid. So here's the question. If you have 936 weeks to influence your kid's faith, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? Are you going to take them chronologically through the entire Bible? Are you going to cover your church's 14 core doctrines? Are you going to teach them verse by verse through the book of Habakkuk? Are you going to amplify whatever your lead pastor is speaking about on Sunday? Just remember, you will only get a limited number of weeks in a year to tell your elementary child or your middle schooler everything they need to know about God, everything they need to know about Jesus and faith and forgiveness and grace and love and life and eternity. So you have to choose what to say. And you have to choose what not to say at every phase. You have to develop the skill of prioritizing truth. Carefully consider the following statement. It's not really your job to teach everything that's in the Bible to every kid at every phase. It's your job to teach the most important things in the phase when they matter most. Yes, it's not your job to teach the Bible cover to cover. Just think about it for a minute. It's your job to help kids know how to love God and to follow Jesus. Let me explain it another way. Just because everything in the Bible is equally true, it doesn't mean everything in the Bible is equally important. Let's go back to what Jesus said to the Pharisees when they asked him which commandment was the greatest. Actually, it's what Jesus did not say that made a very obvious point. He didn't answer their question, well, all the commandments of God are equally important, so there's not one commandment that is the greatest. Instead, he prioritized what was most important by explaining the great commandment. Then he reorganized the rest of the Bible around that idea, a simple idea. Here's what he stated: all the law and prophets hang on this commandment. Every once in a while, an idea comes along that is so big, it becomes a primary organizing factor. In one statement, Jesus settled thousands of years of theological debate about what really matters when it comes to life and faith. He told us that everything should come back to the concept of loving God. So what if you simply decided to organize what you teach the way Jesus said it's already organized anyway? What if you hang all of your content this week, this year, this decade on what Jesus said matters most? It's simple. What if you just make sure every commandment, every principle, every parable, every story, and every truth you teach in the Bible can be easily arranged to reflect how a kid loves God, how a kid loves others, and how a kid loves life? Make your content relational, not informational. Build your strategy around what Jesus says matters the most, and make sure you go to a church that makes a relationship with God a priority too. Remember, you will need other adults saying the same things you say to your kids about God. Think about it this way. Isn't love the distinctive motive of God's story throughout the Bible? It's why God made us in His image, so He could love us and we could love Him. Isn't love the distinctive message of the gospel of Jesus? Jesus lived to model God's love. Jesus died to prove God's love. Jesus rose again to empower us with God's love. And isn't love the distinctive mark of the church and the Christian? Just ask Paul or James. They both agreed. That's why they reposted what Jesus said in their letters to the church. They referred to Jesus' commandment to love as the royal law, as if to say this idea belongs at the top of everything. If you have a limited amount of time with every kid, then what is the one thing you don't want them to miss? Trust me. If love is their filter for life, it will affect everything they do. How they respect their teacher, how they use technology, how they date, how they view sex, how they talk to their sibling, how they treat their own body. There is a difference when kids live out their faith because it's a response to how they love God instead of simply trying to keep the rules. So don't miss it, so they won't miss it. Don't let them walk away from your home or church one day believing the foundation of their faith is a list of rules or skills or even practices. Make sure they know everything comes back to one rule, and that rule gives them the basis to make smarter decisions, to have stronger relationships, and develop a deeper faith. If you want to help a kid have a better future, then help them understand how to love God.